Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, the Major Motion Podcast. I'm John Negroni, a film critic based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And with me, of course, I have one Mr. Will Ashton of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hey, I'm here. I'm back. We're recording again.
Where did you go?
I don't know. I feel like these are so few and far between that I just like, I don't know. I feel like I need to iterate them. Like, I'm back. I'm here. I'm doing it. We're talking movies.
Will's okay. Will's going to be fine. We're back. We're here to talk about The Substance, the new Coralie Fargeat film. Before we get into it, we have a big award season coming up. Will, do you feel ready for it? Do you feel geared up to sprint to the finish of 2024?
I'm excited, yeah, because I feel like, I don't know, it hasn't been a bad year for a film, but I feel like I'm missing that, like, crop of movies. Like, there are a few that I really like this year, but I feel like I'm missing that, like, oh yeah, this is what cinema's about. And I see some titles in the film festival circuits that are really getting me juiced up, and like, you know, like The Brutalist and Nora and Memoir of a Snail are three that come to mind. Different Man, just like things that are coming up on the horizon or are already out and I just don't have access to see quite yet, that really are getting me excited about like the fall award season, as it were. Whether or not all those films will get nominated, I have no idea, but I do feel like, you know, there are sunnier days movie wise ahead, and I hope that is the case. And that's what's getting me excited about award season right now.
I do feel compelled to agree. It's been a quiet September and early October, I think is fair to say. There have been some releases here and there, but there have been also some muted, I think, conversations around the big films coming out week to week. I think it's been very chill. Wild Robot, of course, came out, has been doing well. Terrifier 3 kind of coming out there, punching above its weight, kind of bringing in that horror audience for October. And I know that, you know, I really enjoyed Wild Robot. We did an instant take of it, but Will, I know you haven't seen it quite yet. I imagine you'll probably check it out when you're trying to do your Oscars checklist, as you usually do.
I mean, you gave me like two options, but you forgot to mention that movie as far as what we could discuss this time. And I wish you had reminded me about Wild Robot, because that's probably the one I would have picked.
For some reason, I thought you were not interested. Maybe I misunderstood. I thought you were going to be more geared up for your Joker Folie à Deux or whatever.
I mean, I was trying to see that. It just didn't work out with the time, unfortunately, in the length and what I had available that day. So I had to do The Substance instead. But yeah, no, I'm excited for Wild Robot. I mean, it's DreamWorks. I did a podcast about a lot of their movies, as I'm sure people know at this point. So, you know, I want to see them have a big win, as I'm hearing this movie is. So yeah, I want to see at some point. I feel like I might have to wait until like November when spooky season is done, but we'll see.
That's right. You're doing your 31 days of horror, which The Substance kind of naturally fits into. It's a body horror movie. It's very satirical as well. Almost said kind of satirical, but not really. So The Substance, I saw this early September. It's been a little bit of time since I watched the movie, but I'll admit that it's really stuck with me. I remember it quite well. That doesn't usually happen. I think a lot of the time I have to like rewatch the trailer, you know, and I have to maybe like read some old review or some reviews of it, look back at what I said. With this one, I don't feel like I really had to. I feel like my thoughts on it are pretty baked in at this point, but you have just seen the movie, so excited to get into it. As I mentioned before, Coralie Fargeat, French director. I'm sure that I'm mispronouncing her name. She did that movie Revenge, which I meant to look into whether or not you and I talked about that one on the air. I actually don't recall.
Don't think so, because I think I saw that one after the fact. Like, I think I had to watch that one at home, because I don't know if it actually got released theatrically here in Pittsburgh. But I did like that movie. I thought it was a visually stunning and thoughtful take on the rape revenge genre, which obviously that is a genre that, broadly speaking, is obviously a lot more exploitative. And, you know, it was just neat to see a film like that really kind of, you know, go big and broad and make something actually pretty compelling and thoughtful in a genre that can often be pretty smutty and tasteless. So I was definitely a fan of that, and I was curious about her follow-up, to be sure.
Yeah, same here. Especially when this movie premiered at Cannes, and Cannes Film Festival is notorious, I think, for being one of those festivals that has some buzzy releases that maybe some people will check it out in, you know, May of that year, and be like, this is going to be the next big movie. But then fall comes around. A few movies come out of TIFF, Venice, Telluride, and people kind of just forget about Cannes sometimes. Not all the time, of course. Sometimes you have, for example, your, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or something like that, which it's helped, right? Because sometimes the Cannes movies will then ladder into a big splashy summer or late summer release. Not quite the case with The Substance. The Substance coming out really at the heat of award season picking up. And it's been slowly rolling out over the last several weeks, over the last month, really. And I would say that my expectations going in, I had heard from a couple of people that it was a little split. I think there were a couple of people I knew and trusted who were a little bit like, this one doesn't quite do it. But then a few more people were saying this is one of their favorite movies of the year. So that was my context going in. I have to assume for you, it was probably even more confusing and messy because at this point, I think the narrative for The Substance, I can't clue in on it at this point. I can't hone in on what people are saying.
Yeah, I was kind of dreading this one because it's not like a fun kind of discourse for me. Like, I think Megapocalypse, the discourse for that movie is really, really fun. And like seeing everyone just have a totally different reaction. Some of which are totally valid. Some I think are a little exaggerated, but none of them are like off base necessarily. It's just because that movie is such a like madcap kind of experience that, I think it invites so many opinions and reactions and it's really fun to discuss that movie. This one, just based on the discourse, it just seemed like it was just kind of like, okay, I have a general idea what I can expect from this. It seems like some people like it, some people don't, but I have an idea, just kind of the way everyone's painting it of what this is going to be. And I don't know if I'm really all that keen to see that at this point, but I know you were excited about it. And, I kind of trudged along, even though I did like the previous film of hers. I just feel like this one was just not really gearing up towards my interest at this point.
I see. And for me, it really came down to, okay, I'm not really so I'm not on Twitter, obviously. And I'm not really in all the discourse spaces at this point. I maybe will, check in on like the subreddit for r/movies or something like that. I might also maybe just, kind of pop in to something on Threads or whatever. But honestly, like for me, the discourse comes down to like my group of friends, checking in, like people I know watching things and then going on Letterboxd. So I'm not seeing tweet threads of people talking. I have to imagine this is the kind of movie where people are writing like 23 tweets about how this movie is terrible because of X, Y, and Z, or somebody being like, this movie is a classic masterpiece and nothing good enough can be said about it.
I would say, not that there isn't that online and on Twitter, but Letterboxd was also equally annoying about this.
I feel like though with Letterboxd, I can more easily avoid those things. Like, I don't know. I feel like that's always going to be in a certain bucket of the website where I don't go. I just I manage to, for my part, collectively just go to the people I follow. And I'm not seeing that same kind of reactionary weirdness, just algorithmically dropping onto me without me asking for it.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just a follower thing. I don't know. I feel like this movie just kind of just inspires a lot of chatty discourse that I can see why it inspires the discourse it does. I just kind of find it tiresome. It is what it is.
Yeah, it is later for you over there, so I can understand why you're so tired. All right, let's talk about this movie a bit. What is it actually about? I kind of mentioned it's a body horror film, very much in the tradition of Giallo films. A lot of Cronenberg in this one, and also a lot of Sunset Boulevard as well. You're giving me this confused face, Will Ashton. What's the problem?
Well, obviously, in a very broad sense, Sunset Boulevard, sure, it's a Hollywood tale. This is more...
It takes like a caricature from that movie. It's Norma Desmond mixed with, Videodrome in some ways.
This is more like Stuart Gordon, Brian Yuza kind of body horror. Less David Cronenberg-ish. It's a lot...
Okay. Oh, we cannot pretend like the last half hour of this movie doesn't exist.
Well, that is exactly what the Brian Yuza stuff is. That is basically taking a page from Society at that point.
I think you're taking more from modern Cronenberg. You're not taking from 80s Cronenberg then, are you?
No, I think you're just limited in your perception of maybe what body horror is. Cronenberg is like the easy go-to, and I'm not saying it's like not an influence. Obviously, Cronenberg is an influence on all body horror, but this is obviously going for something a lot kind of goofier and hammier. I think less.
You don't think Cronenberg is goofy or hammy?
Can be, but he's a lot more clinical and like analytical about things, especially late. Like if you watch like Crimes of the Future, that movie is a lot more, I think, colder in a good way. I think colder, more detached, a lot more willing to kind of wrestle with like the darkness of kind of like what it means to be a human and the idea of the skin and the relationship to the body. And I don't know. I just feel like this movie.
That's exactly what this movie is, though. I mean, it's literally about that.
It's going for something obviously like sillier in that respect, in the way that like Stuart Gordon and Brian uses. I'm guessing you haven't seen Society, which may explain why the comparison is not really clicking, but I'm just saying, I mean, I think you're taking umbrage with the comparison that I don't know if you're as familiar with those two filmmakers, but in any case, I feel like the movie that this did remind me of is Death Becomes Her in a little bit, in the sense of like, kind of like this take on, you know, Hollywood glamour and self-perception and the idea of trying to fighting aging, all this stuff. And that movie is, you know, I think a lot campier, a lot goofier. It's a Robert Zemeckis. And this movie is kind of going for more of a like prestige art house kind of thing, but like with exploitative vibes. Like I said, in the kind of Stuart Gordon vein, which is fine. I think it's an interesting sort of blend. I don't know if it fully works, but I can see at least, I think what Coraline, how do you pronounce her last name?
Coralie Fargeat.
Fargeat is at least kind of going for in the aesthetic sense.
Well, back to what the movie is about. It is as we mentioned, kind of a satirical thing about Hollywood, body image and those sorts of things. It starts off with this little bit of like a short film montage, almost kind of just walking us into the world of the main character, who's played by Demi Moore, who just turned 50. And the montage kind of walks us through the very obvious thing and the one-to-one with Demi Moore's real life, which is that in the 80s, she was a bit of a starlet, a young talent, but then in her older age, she is now the star of a TV series, kind of Jane Fonda-esque workout show. It's a very uncanny kind of movie in the way it depicts Hollywood. It seems very purposely twisting on its head of what's popular in the now, while also, you know, kind of like merging the 80s, 90s, and 2000s together into a contemporary version of it, which I find really interesting. It's very much a choice. And we also have Demi Moore kind of going up against Margaret Qualley, who, after she discovers this kind of mysterious serum, there's a chance for her to essentially, it's like the Ozempic of this movie, where she can have a new self, a kind of body double, essentially. We don't have to get into the specifics because really all the rules around this, it's a little bit like Gremlins. It's a little arbitrary. It's not exactly one of those things where all of it is supposed to make scientific sense at all. It's very highfalutin. But the point is that she basically trades places with a younger version of herself who is still herself. Her consciousness is slipping from body to body. And the younger version of her is played by Margaret Qualley, who we have seen in very recently in Drive Away Dolls, one of Will Ashton's, you know, most recent on-screen performances. Keep an eye out for the Oscar. And of course, other than that, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well, since we did already mention that earlier.
Also, Kinds of Kindness she had this year.
Still haven't seen that one. And yeah, I
think that's probably my favorite of the ones that she's done. I don't think that's her best performance of the year, but I think that's my favorite of the three films that she's been that I've seen.
Well, I would say for this one, the movie very much belongs to Demi Moore. Very much her movie. She kind of runs the show. Dennis Quaid is really the only other major character in this film. And Quaid, if there was a Dennis Quaid performance I can think of that I like more than this one, I can't. Just to give he plays like a sleazy movie executive named Harvey. And that should kind of give you a sense of how subtle this movie is. It's not subtle at all, which I have been seeing a lot of this, used as a pejorative of being like, I just wish this movie was subtle, or I wish this movie did this. I'm very much happy with how this movie is not subtle at all. And I don't see it as a bad thing. In fact, I think that it's part of the point that this movie is trying to tell about Hollywood, the superficiality of Hollywood. And I feel like the message this movie has about body positivity, genuinely, I've seen a lot of people drawing the lines too in terms of, how this movie is for women. And obviously that's the case. But I think so many men can watch this movie and get a lot out of it as well, because it really is like, it's something primal that I think a lot of people struggle with. And there was something, I don't know, I felt very, very healed by this movie. It took me a few days of really sitting with it and thinking about it. Like, why did I feel the way that I did after seeing this? And I think it's because I just think Fargeat is really good at that kind of like using high concept, highly stylized cinematic nonsense and absurdity to kind of elicit a very powerful emotional response like this, which I just think is something not to sneeze at for sure. So this is coming out of Mubi, by the way. I think they did Decision to Leave. I forget what else, but
yeah. Well, yeah, they're a streaming service, but they've been tipping their hand into film distribution. They did Passages last year as well. Right now, they're doing a re-release of Parsons the Fall. Yeah, they have a lot of great stuff. And this was originally a Universal title. They acquired it from Universal. I don't know if they just decided that they weren't going to get their money back for this or what, but it was a big acquisition for them. And I think it's at least broken even for them. So
it has, I think, in terms of the budget. Well, I should say the budget and I don't think the acquisition was huge, but they've already made well past like more than double the budget at this point. And so I think they're on their way.
I'm assuming Universal probably sold it for whatever it costs to make, which I think was like 15 million or something.
17, 18.
I don't know for sure. I'm just assuming that they just sold it and decided to break even rather than take it as a loss because they assumed it wasn't going to make its money back for whatever reason. And Mubi, took a big swing and decided to do their first wide release, which is neat. I mean, it for whatever issues I have with this movie, I do appreciate that something this gross and weird is playing in like mall cinemas because of Mubi. I can appreciate, something like this being not limited to like select art house theaters, but actually getting a fairly sizable release. So I'll give it props for that. And I definitely give props to Mubi for that.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I very much enjoyed this movie, warts and all. I think that the obvious criticisms, a bit too long, and I can see the criticism of like it making the same point over and over again. But I think the reason I sort of move past a lot of that is A, because I just love seeing Demi Moore really go for it. And B, I mean, I've always felt this like distaste for Hollywood, which it always surprises people because they'll be like, "Oh, John, why don't you live in LA? You should live in LA. You love movies, Mr. Film Critic John." I hate LA. And like, I love the people that I know from LA, but the vibe, the atmosphere, being on like Hollywood, like Sunset Boulevard and like that area by the Chinese theater, just in general, being in LA too long, it depresses me because I hate it. It is just not for me, not judging anybody who likes it, but just there's something about the vibe of Hollywood, the gaze of Hollywood that it just makes me very uncomfortable, very unsettling for me. I love the Bay Area. I love San Francisco. That's more my vibe. Everybody gets to be happy in this case. But this movie kind of takes a magnifying glass, I guess, or maybe a telescope to really just examining like the Hollywood sort of that kind of sleaziness that is just like in the air everywhere you go. In a way that I don't think a ton of movies always get right. Sometimes they get them right, like different shades of it, like Nightcrawler or something. But this one I feel like is very unique in that way. And I can always appreciate a movie with some grossness. I like the grossness in this. What do you think of the movie, Will Ashton?
I thought it was fine. I don't know. Like, I still think it's really funny that you thought this was going to be my thing because like, I just feel like I'm kind of over this at this point. Like, I don't know. I think in 2018, this would have really been my bag, but now I'm just like older and I find this to be a rather, like you say, it's going for a lot of style and I love the aesthetics as far as like the cinematography looks great. I really love the production design. I love the makeup effects. I like that it gets really dumb and silly at the end, but I also just found it to be a kind of overlong, tedious Tales from the Crypt episode that kind of went on for 2.5 hours. And I feel like I would have preferred maybe like a fun midnight version of like 95 minutes. But, you know, at 2.5 hours, it really kind of, it's a little bit of a slog. I feel like it does kind of take its toll for a while. And I feel like it doesn't really have all that much to say to really justify the length. But
Could not disagree more.
I do think people are maybe shortchanging some of the commentary in the sense that like, I feel like it's not solely just the idea of like this sort of Hollywood gaze that is, you know, pressuring the characters. I think it is a lot of internal stuff, and the movie makes a lot of deliberate points to acknowledge that, you know, it is a flaw of Demi Moore's character that she subscribes too much to this sort of Hollywood idealized version of beauty standards. And I think that kind of adds some layers to the character that I think are compelling. I don't think the movie really dives, I don't want to say doesn't dive deep, but I feel like it kind of introduces those ideas and kind of just establishes them in a way that felt a little pedestrian for me. But I will say, you know, Demi Moore, I love her commitment to the role. I think she does a good job. Dennis Quaid steals the show. I thought he was so fun. I really love seeing him play a toothy, just totally chauvinist asshole character that is just, he's clearly having a ball. And I think he's the one that's probably the most self-aware about like how much this, actually, I shouldn't say self-aware because I really don't know, given his politics, how much he's aware of.
It makes sense in a way, right? Because he's probably a typical, like, I hate Hollywood and like the caricature of it. Like, I think that does align probably with his politics.
Right. But I think he's like very self-aware of the tone of the film. And I think he's the one that plays into it the most, is having the most fun here. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad film. It's enjoyable. I think purely as a piece of gross, overlong entertainment, it's totally fine. It's serviceable. It's not really one that stuck with me all that much compared to you, but you know, it does what it expects. I think it's something that I think younger audiences who are maybe less attuned to the movies that it's ripping off or homaging will probably get more out of. But for me, I enjoyed the ride well enough to like not feel like it was a wasted time, but I also at the same time feel like, I don't know, I would rather just kind of watch Society or Death Becomes Her again rather than this.
Well, first of all, I'm older than you, Mr. Will. Just putting that out there. But yeah, I gotta say, I mentioned the body positivity. I mean, I don't know. I think I've seen plenty of movies before that are trying to say these things, and they're trying to talk about, you know, you should don't beat yourself up, you know, about your appearance and all these things. And like, I don't know. I feel like kind of similar to Revenge. I think Coralie Fargeat, she's really good at flipping the script on these things and providing a way for people to kind of process their insecurities or their fears, right? Revenge was like the fear of being, you know, violated, of assaulted, of being raped. And this movie is kind of tapping into that violation of the whole world, you know, wanting you to be something that's impossible. And here comes this thing that's impossible called the substance, blah, blah, blah. And it reminds me so much of like people I know who are going through, you know, I'm still young, you know, like I'm still in my 30s and everything, but I am starting to get to that point where people around me at the same age, body is starting to change. It's like the early stuff of it, obviously, but that reality of like, my body's going to let me down, it's starting to kind of come into play. It's starting to become a more persistent thought in my everyday life or in the conversations of me and my friends. And this movie is just so much about like accepting something really difficult in that way. And I do think it uses the runtime effectively because it's like that slow spiral. I think if it, you know, because I hesitate to be like it's too long, just because I think if it was any shorter, it would be an issue. I think that it would be too slow of a process in terms of like, there's something so fascinating to me about the duality of this person, of like these, like the younger self versus the older self and how all that comes into play. I mean, it's just, I think there's a lot to chew on there. Obviously, not everyone's going to chew on it equally, I know. But for me, like it hit my vibe. It hit me where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just glad that you got as much as you did out of it. I don't know really what else to say as far as like that goes. Like I said, it's not an ineffective film. I think, it serves its point and it visually looks stunning, but yeah, I guess I just don't take as much out of it. I feel like it's not maybe as substantial to me as it was for you, and that's fine. Substantial, no pun intended.
I did say something in my instant take that I think I've kind of come back on for sure, which is that I remember being a little bit more like, oh, this isn't really a movie to have like super deep conversations about. It's more of a movie about like, it's like feel over substance, a little bit more of like, wow, what the heck was that? But yeah, as time has gone on, I think I missed the beat on that just because I have actually like talked to a few people who've liked the movie who've been way more, I think like the movie they took totally different things away from it. I talked to one person who was like, yeah, this movie to me like totally resonated with the experience of like transitioning because they transitioned from female to male. And they were like the way that it's depicted, like the needle stuff, the like switching between bodies. They were like, holy cow, like this was just so much like hitting them like that. And I was like, wow, yeah, I wouldn't have even picked up on that.
I mean, I think that's a really cool experience. And I would love to read and hear more perspectives in that sense. 'Cause I feel like those are kind of broadly being overlooked as far as what the discourse of the film is from what I've seen.
Yeah, it is a really interesting perspective, especially because I couldn't tell you if that's what Fargeat was intentionally trying to do. Not that it matters either way, right? But because it's always fascinating when you can kind of find stuff in that the author doesn't intend. I was just talking to somebody the other day about they were telling me that there's like a whole. Are you familiar with Danny Phantom or My Life as a Teenage Robot?
Danny Phantom, that was a Cartoon Network show.
Nickelodeon.
Oh, Nickelodeon.
Yeah,
I remember it being a thing. I didn't grow up with cable. I think I've mentioned that before, but
I know, but I wasn't sure if you were aware of it at all. But
I've seen ads for it. I remember as a kid.
Same guy who made Fairly Odd Parents, but so it was like that show and My Life as a Teenage Robot. Apparently, there are these like large communities of queer and trans people who are like, oh yeah, like if you read between the lines, like the show clearly like seems to have, or maybe not clearly in Danny Phantom, it's a little bit more subtle. But apparently My Life as a Teenage Robot has some like, you can like read into some like trans themes. And apparently the creators are like, oh yeah, we didn't intend that, but that's awesome that you took that out of it. 'Cause, if that helped you, process it, that's awesome. So I don't know if that's the case with the substance, but I found that kind of interesting. There was also, I don't know. I saw one person, or I was talking to one person about the movie and they were saying, they brought up, I think, just how while they were watching it, they struggled a bit more with like the grossness. They were like, I felt kind of like it made me really queasy and stuff. And, I wasn't sure if I could finish the movie. And then when it got to the end, they said that like, they kept saying it was like a sledgehammer. Like it hit them like it was too much. And they just kind of wished that the movie, I was kind of talking about before, that was a little bit more subtle. But yeah, I differ just because like, I don't know. I think that's what I like about it.
I mean, that's basically what like the Terrifier movies are. Like they're just trying to be like so grotesque and over the top that you feel bludgeoned by it. I think those, I haven't seen the third one. I saw the second Terrifier before I saw this. And I felt like I kind of had similar experiences in the sense of like, they're both like 2.5 hours long and they're both trying to be like as gooey and messed up as possible. But yeah, I don't really think, I don't know. I guess maybe just the hype was a little too much. I didn't really think this movie was all that crazy. Like I feel like I just seen too many horror movies.
I do agree with that. Yeah, because I don't remember ever being super gross out. I think I saw one person mention like on Letterboxd like the grossest thing in the movie. It was Dennis Quaid eating shrimp. I was like, yeah, pretty much. That was the only part where I felt a little bit like, oh.
There is like one scene, and it's hard to discuss because it is very spoilery, but it involves like physical deterioration with one character, and I think that's like the most effective scene in the movie. Cause like for all like the blood and gore and goo and stuff like that, to me was way more unsettling than like any of the like blood splatter or whatever. Like I think that to me is like where this movie excels. And I kind of want it to be either on that register or just like the super dumb stuff at the end. But I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I mean, you see like scenes like that and you're like, okay, like very clearly this is a talented filmmaker. And I think that she's going to have a pretty outstanding career. I feel like this is, in my view, a bit of a sophomore slump, but I can see why it's resonating with other people.
I definitely agree. And I love the last part of it. It's just, I was laughing I was having a great time. I was like, what a way to finish the movie, quite honestly. And I was just ready, and it just kept going and going. And I was like, oh my, like, it just kept topping itself, quite honestly. My favorite scene in the whole movie is the getting ready for the date. That was the one. That's where I kind of like it solidified for me that I was like, yeah, I really like this movie. There was something about the way that whole thing went down where it broke my heart completely.
Yeah, I feel for Fred. I feel like there's a part of me, and I felt like another sign of me getting older was like, you know, like I the gore and stuff is going to come and it's going to be fine, whatever. But like, I kind of would just be cool with this being a kind of like late in life romance between like two, you know, like former high school classmates. Like, I'd be kind of fine if that's just where this movie went and it didn't do all the horror stuff. Like, I get it's October and whatever, and like, that's where it's going to go. But like, I don't know, the Fred stuff's like kind of charming. Like, I was kind of digging that section.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Stuff. I mean, the movie is so heightened. I think that, yeah, it's like, it's easy to suspend your disbelief at a certain point because it's like, just like the apartment, the way everything's laid out, the fact that the whole concept of like an aerobic show being like the #1 show in like the world, all this stuff. It's hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, I get that like you were saying, it's trying to kind of be this sort of vague time period. I think that for me, that's more of a criticism than a plus. I feel like it's not really specific enough at satire to really work as a comedy outside of the Dennis Quaid stuff, but I don't know. I was kind of confused as far as like how little it really committed to that stuff in the sense of like one of the most genuinely surprising things for me in the movie is like when a character pulls out a modern cell phone and I was like, oh, okay, this is like supposed to be somewhat modern day. Cause I thought this was like almost trying to be like an 80s, 90s like period piece by how much it like takes stock in like ratings and these workout videos and like all these things. And like the idea of the internet and stands and like all these things aren't like, and like talk shows are like considered like valuable things in a way that like now it's just kind of like, well, I mean, outside of its like, Twitter, relevance, I guess is kind of seen as here or there, but yeah, I don't know. Like that was a really weird thing about this movie for me. I was a little kind of taken aback by that.
Yeah, I hear you on that for sure. Definitely had a few interesting conversations with people about, you know, there was some discourse, I think, that I came into in terms of like how this movie uses the male gaze, you know, to kind of, because there was some disagreement. There was like, oh, this movie is, you know, taking a shot at the male gaze by constantly like leering at Margaret Qualley all the time while also indulging in that for the sake of the movie. But then, you know, I think like the counter to that obviously is that, well, you kind of have to show the male gaze in that sense in order to make the point. And so I don't know. It's a little bit of a gray area, I guess. I can understand both sides of it. I personally, but I don't know. There are just so many fun references in this. All the Kubrick references, the fact that like Sue, you could read that as like Mary Sue, the younger character. I don't know. It just feels, I don't know. It's like one of those movies. Like nice little Easter egg here, a little Easter egg there. Put in my basket.
I mean, a lot of references to Psycho as well. I guess for me, those just kind of felt, yeah, I don't know. Those fell a little flat for me just because it's like, it's a lot of aesthetic signifiers, but it didn't really, I feel like, add a whole lot to me as far as the weight. It feels like this kind of thing that's happening now, like with A24 films and Neon films, where it's like a lot of like GIF-worthy moments and a lot of like, hey, like, oh, patting like young filmmakers on the back because like they can like do paches where it's like, here's the bathroom from The Shining and here's the bathroom in this movie. They're very similar. And it's like, I don't know. It just doesn't, it doesn't really work for me because it just feels a little irksome in the sense of like, I don't know. It's not really, I feel like lending a whole lot to the text. It just feels like it's just kind of like doing the like Leonardo DiCaprio pointing meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in a film sort of way. But
I just see it as a sincere homage, just me personally. But what are you going to do? I also like some of the narrative, you know, you can read into of like this whole concept of like how we treat the elderly, you know, people aging, like putting them in a dark room and like trying to forget about them. That was something that kind of hit me pretty hard. I remember just being like, okay, definitely not subtle, but I guess like in a way that's good that it's not subtle. All the Dorian Gray stuff that you can kind of bring it into it too. I don't know. I just think that it has so many things going on. I'm just surprised that I don't consider it to be a huge annoying mess. And it's not even, and I don't see a lot of people even saying that. I just see people kind of being like, yeah, whatever. It's like, it's fine. Like that kind of, Will Ashton sort of response.
Yeah. I mean, it is a little annoying to me, but I don't know if I would go so far as to call it a mess. I think it's just kind of, it serves its point. I think it's so kind of basic in its structure that it would be hard to make it a mess. Like, I don't know. I guess for me, that's where the substance, as it were, of the film is kind of lacking for me. But I don't know. I do think it's interesting that this movie won the screenplay award at the Cannes Film Festival. And I saw critic Guy Lauch kind of make an astute point, which was that he said, like, almost every film festival jury treats best screenplay not as a writing award, but as extra consolation prize to throw at a film that at least some jurors liked. And there's no more blatant proof of that than the substance winning best screenplay at the Cannes Film Festival. And I feel like that feels right to me in the sense of like, it seems like a film that clearly people.
I love the screenplay in this.
I think the screenplay is easily the weakest aspect of the film, but I think in
no
the sense
way.
That, like, but I think what he's saying is true in the sense of like, this is a film that clearly is resonating with people, at least some people. And I think they want to laud it in some respect. And I get that, like, from the Cannes Film Festival perspective, like they gave it screenplay because it's like, well, want to give it something. And I guess that does the trick, because you can only win, each film can only win one award at the Cannes Film Festival. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you maybe think the screenplay is better than I do, and that's fine. I think it's definitely more of a directing triumph than the screenplay triumph, but that's neither here nor there for me.
Yeah. I just, I feel like I've already kind of gone at length what I like about the setup of the movie in general in terms of the writing. For me, screenplay is way more than, like, there's not a ton of dialogue. There's, plenty, but it's not a dialogue thing in this case. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to be clear about that.
No,
I think I think you called the structure of the movie basic. I think the structure of the movie is really great. I think it takes a lot of really smart twists and turns, and it never lagged for me. So.
Yeah, I guess we just gotta agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I think I kind of prefer when it got silly and goofy at the end rather than the first 2/3 in that respect. But more than anything, I think I just want you to watch Society. Like, that's my big takeaway from this whole episode. I feel like I'd love, because that's such a fun movie, and that is such a sharp commentary that I think still really resonates now. And if you really enjoyed this movie, I think you're going to love that movie as well. So that's my big takeaway for you, is I think you should watch that movie.
I think I've already seen Cafe Society, so I should be good.
That'd be a wild double feature, but not quite what you're expecting. Yeah, I think you should at least look into that movie. I think you'd like it more than you think.
All right, let's play the Rotten Tomatoes game. We have 305 reviews counted. Will Ashton, what do you think the Rotten Tomatoes score is?
It seems like critics are enjoying this one. I'm going to say 84%.
It's higher. It's 90%. It's in the 90th percentile. But what about the popcorn meter? That's formerly the audience meter. We have 1,000 plus verified ratings. That's a lot more than I expected, honestly. But there you go.
I am going to say 87%.
No, 73. I'm surprised you'd guess that high, considering the gross factor. I feel like a lot of people just kind of rebel against movies with that much grossness.
It doesn't really seem like general audiences that I've heard, because we did play this at the theater. It seems like the general response, I'm not seeing a lot of people walk out of the movie or harumphing about it. It just seems like most people are just being like, yeah, it's fun. Whatever issues they might have, it's kind of dissuaded by yeah, it's an enjoyable movie. Which is, I think,
to be fair, it's an art house theater. I feel like people probably in your theater knew what they were getting themselves into, right?
I don't know how to respond to that in a way that might not come back to haunt me.
I guess I'm just trying to say it's different from an AMC in Indiana, I feel like that kind of crowd would probably be a little bit more like, the heck did I just watch?
Maybe. I don't want to disparage those fine folks in Indiana that they're well-read and well-versed in the films they see.
Fair play. All right. What about the cinema score, Will Ashton? What do you think?
I don't think I've been spoiled on this one. Is it a B+?
just a little lower. It's a B. That's about what I would probably predict, B or B minus. So I think that tracks. Because I feel like, yeah, it is resonating with people, like you said. But we got to go to Letterboxd. Letterboxd is the real test, isn't it? In this case, 596,000 watches. It is a true Letterboxd movie in that respect. Letterboxd is where there are lots of Mubi fans. That's the streaming service, not movie. Will Ashton, what do you think the average is out of 5?
I know it's high because I saw earlier this month there was a Letterboxd list that showed the highest rated films on Letterboxd that are horror movies directed by women. And I saw The Substance was currently listed as number 1. And so I'm going to say it's probably like 4.2 right now.
No, it's actually not 4.2. That's a bit higher. It's actually 4. Just an even 4.0, which is still very high, especially for, I think, I don't want to say a movie like this, but probably a movie that's, it's getting some discourse, some naysayers, to be sure. And I think it's probably, getting some of its naysayers in the next, over the last week or so. Speaking of which, we can look at some of our friends on Letterboxd. Friend of the show, Clinton Worthington, gave it 2.5 stars. Here's what Clint had to say about The Substance. He wrote, glitzy and campy in so many squicky, delicious ways, especially in the last 30 minutes. But for all of its sledgehammer satire of the beauty industry, it can't quite land on a real target. Is it a metaphor for eating disorders, fillers? Is there a through line for transition and the ambivalence one feels towards the body you used to have? None of it really sticks. On top of the entertainment world, it satirizes being restricted to a single Jane Fonda-esque exercise show. Demi Moore seems to want to upend her life to impress a single Dennis Quaid, which doesn't seem like quite enough. Works best when it embraces its one-note silliness, Carrie nods, and all. But that can't quite stretch the conceit to the running time of Megalopolis. Yeah, I mean, I just disagree with Clinton here. I do think that the metaphor is all the above. And for me, it stuck.
I mean, I don't agree with everything he said, but I think those last 2 sentences are very much spot on, especially about Megalopolis.
Nice. Let's take a look here. We have another friend of the show, a former co-host of the show. In fact, now it'd be Abby Olchesi, the legend herself, wrote, I watched people make faces and curl up in positions I'd never seen before during this movie. I think that means it's good. I agree with Abby in that case. I love a good audience reaction in these things.
I think we should, do we talk about how Abby has a book out right now?
Abby's book? Yeah, I think I saw her post something about it. Should we plug it? We should.
Yeah, we should. I just think it's worth plugging the book. I haven't read it yet, unfortunately, but
I haven't either. It's Films for All Seasons. I know it's on Amazon. I'm not sure where else you can get it, but yeah, I want to read it as well. Maybe we could have a longer thing. I'd love to have Abby back on the show too, to plug the book. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I would love
Let's manifest it.
Just talking to her, catching up with her and learning about the book and what she's been up to. I think that'd be a really nice opportunity.
Yeah, that is one pretty tough thing about not having Twitter anymore, is that I can't keep up with Abby's old chess sayings. I can't really do anything with that. No puns. Here's what our good friend of the show, Corey Woodruff, had to say about The Substance. He wrote, the French are cornering the body horror market this decade, gleefully in love with the genre. So obvious in theme, you can just enjoy the fun. Demi Moore! Exclamation. I love Corey. Corey's, that was simple, clear, and effective for me.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it should be noted that of the 2 French women body horror filmmakers, I'm definitely leaning more towards Julia Dakanakama.
You got this.
I still know how to pronounce her name, unfortunately, but
I unfortunately don't either. French is my weakness, and not in that way.
But I think Raw is still my favorite body horror of the last 10 years. I think that's such
great
a
movie.
And I really like Titan too. I don't think it's quite as good, but I think that's a sophomore body horror film that is, in my view, worthy of all the praise and discourse that it warranted.
Friend of the show, Ryan Oliver, he wrote a review that has a few spoilers, so I'm going to talk around them, but he put blunt as the back end of a rifle, but it does what I've been complaining that far too many genre films these days don't do enough anymore, which is it puts its genre elements first and messaging second. Truly unique and genuinely fun. I found myself laughing, squeamish, horrified, and entertained. often all at the same time. Only 5 people at my matinee, sadly, but 2 of them walked out during that third act reveal. As the kids say, we are so back. 4.5 stars. Yeah, I'm mostly with Ryan on this. I don't think I would agree that the messaging comes second. I think that they're kind of like on the same tier for me. But I will say what Ryan is saying here, that is what I was thinking right after watching it. So I do think that I didn't really change my mind on that until sometime processing the movie, to be fair. I've got to read Emma Sasek, Sasek the classic, right? Yeah. Classic Sasek. Yeah. Whatever nickname you want. She wrote, she gave the movie 5 stars. Full perfect review. Now remember, Emma was a big fan of Titan as well, if you want to invoke. But she wrote, oh, yes. Inject me with this film any day. A totally in-your-face film from start to finish that goes there in every sense. It's loud, it's colorful, it's hilarious, it's ridiculous in the best ways possible, and it's painfully relatable too. Coralie Fargeat has delivered a wild spectacle that is so wacky and yet says so much about how society uses women until they're sucked dry of their beauty and youth, the only things that seemingly give them their worth in our world. Demi Moore is so good. There are some scenes that are so heart-shattering to watch, and she delivers them with such poise. Margaret Qualley is an absolute delight too. These ladies navigate such a great dance with each other, and it's bonkers to see what they'll do each time they take center stage. Dennis Quaid is also giving the most insane performance, and I loved it. Was so disgusted by him / wanted to punch him. I'll say, whenever Margaret Qualley was on the screen, I don't dislike Margaret Qualley, just to be clear, but I miss Demi Moore. I think that, I don't know, Demi, in this movie for me, Demi Moore was just so good that it kind of irked me when she wasn't kind of, doing her thing.
I mean, I do think this is probably my least favorite of the Margaret Qualley movies of the year, but I thought she did a nice job. I think she made the most of the character. Her commitment to the performance, at least from a nudity standpoint, I think shouldn't be.
Oh, that wasn't her actual nudeness. So I heard her talk in an interview that they used prosthetics.
She used prosthetic boobs, but
yeah.
I don't want to. I feel too scuzzy to discuss, but the boobs are prosthetic because, yeah.
Okay. Well, Ash, I know that's your co-star you're talking about, so I understand. Okay, so that'll do it for this week's episode of Cinemaholic. Washington, what are we talking about next? What's coming out?
I don't know. What are we talking about next? Are you going to see Memoir of a Snail?
A genuine question. I do have, so it's a screener weekend for me, at least that's the plan. There are a few movies that I want to check out. I do also want to see Anora pretty soon, Conclave. Some screenings for me coming up. It just is a matter of, can I go see them? I wasn't planning on seeing Smile 2 because I don't really remember the first Smile. So I don't know. Maybe I will because I am a little curious. Are you going to watch it?
Yeah.
It is horror month.
I do want to see Rumors as well. The Guy Madden movie.
That one came out at TIFF, right?
I think that was also a con release as well.
Maybe it just screened at TIFF, and that's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, I would like to see that.
It was probably a TIFF as well. I think it was a con premiere. But yeah, I think, I'm very excited to see what that goofiness is going to be. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out. I probably will.
There's The Apprentice. Oh, sorry, what?
I was saying I probably will get around to seeing Joker 2 at some point, which I am curious about. I'm more curious about that movie than The Substance at this point. But, in any case, I don't expect it to be necessarily a good film, but I think that'll be a more intriguing conversation maybe, but we'll see if I get around to that. I don't know.
If you say so. The Apprentice, I think, would be interesting to talk about if we get to it. I don't know if I'm rushing to see it though, quite honestly. Just the subject matter. I'm tired. I don't want to. But
I want to go to movies to escape from,
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a pretty good film. I don't know.
I've heard it's good, not amazing. We Live in Time. I was sad I missed my screening for this one. This just kind of looks like my jam. I love Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield. They're my buddies. Even if the movie's only okay, that's fine with me. I just want to see them have fun.
The only way this would be more your thing is if Andrew Garfield is just like, oh, I'm actually an Irish boy. Yeah.
There you go. That would kind of seal the deal. Piece by piece, I have been actively avoiding this movie so much.
I feel like
I've heard the reviews are stellar, which I'm just like, what? The trailer for this made me upset.
I haven't seen the trailer. I feel like this would be such a fun mini review with Matt Serafini because he's such a Lego head. And I just think it's such a weird project that I'd be I know he's seen the film and I'd be very curious to discuss it with him. But it's also one of those films where it's like, I would be surprised if it's higher than like 6 on the number of films I want to see in theaters right now.
It's like, I'm so surprised. I'm like, what? Who is watching this movie and like giving it such great reviews? But whatever. And then last, I'll just bring up the Outrun. I'm anxious to see that. I have a screener now and very looking forward to that. I want to see what Saoirse Ronan can do with this one.
Yeah, that one has already come and gone to theaters near here. I mentioned it before. I really want to see A Different Man, which is not playing anywhere near me, which is really
well, what's wrong with the man you already have? Trading me for some other schmuck?
Just speaking of Sebastian Stan, as we mentioned, The Apprentice, I heard that movie is so good, and I hope someone picks it up locally because I'm excited to finally see that, but might just have to wait till VOD or something.
Yeah, agreed. All right, plenty of other stuff, but that'll do it for us this time. We'll be back soon to talk about who knows what. In the meantime, thanks for listening. And from the Internet California, John Negroni.
And from the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ash.
See you next time.
Bye.